It's an afternoon time post lunch, so the general moderator's job is to wake up everyone. So, hello everyone, wake up. We have a very good panel members. Thank you for being here. Yeah, I was wondering where is Sridhar? Sridhar, hi. Finally, we see you. So, hi Massimo,
Hi.
Ajit, Siddharth, Anirudh, Sridhar. I will, to set the context, what I will do is I'll probably brag about a little bit of what knowledge I carry about cryptos. So since I have the mic first, so just to give some context to the non-suspecting audience that we have, uh, I will try and explain what is a cryptocurrency, what is a crypto asset, and what is a central bank digital currency. So crypto, in the basic form, all of these are encrypted blockchain-based forms of tokens that you can carry with you, just like you do cash. You have a digital version of cash, so you can't touch it, but it's very much there, and it's very much recorded, and you can't delete the record, and it's secure. It's crypto after all. The difference between the concept of what is called a cryptocurrency, an asset, and a central bank digital currency is as follows. Cryptocurrency as a concept is something that you can use as a legal tender to buy and sell goods. Siddharth must be laughing. I think I'm safeguarding, already what he's going to say. So, crypto asset, on the other hand, is considered something of value which also is cryptographically secured. It's on blockchain, and you have tokenized it and things like that, but it's a new kind of asset which is digital asset. And the value of such asset, like any other asset like gold, oil, anything, is determined by the buying and selling, the demand and supply of that asset. So that's a crypto asset. You don't use the asset to buy and sell coffee, but you use it to hold it as you would do for other physical assets or other digital assets. Central bank digital currency is a cryptocurrency issued by the central bank, which has the guarantee from the central bank to actually say that I owe you this much amount, along with that, and the central bank takes the liability for that, for that guarantee issued in the market. So that is, in a nutshell, people like me who try to understand all this, I can define. So that is the context, and I would begin the panel discussion, by welcoming Massimo first, connecting his talk with ours now. So Massimo, how do you see the conglomerate of nations adopting or moving towards crypto? So you did describe some of the BIS findings, etc., but I think I would like to ask you a slightly deeper question. What's happening?
Yes. First of all, let me make a disclaimer, which is mandatory. My statements are only my personal opinions and not related to my organizations.
Sure. All the organizers, please note down.
Yes, thank you. Now, I can tell you what my impression is related to United Nations and to some other institutions. Generally speaking, towards the crypto world, there has been, at the beginning, some sort of distance from the main institutions. But then this has been seen as an improvement more and more from general institutions. In fact, if you look at, for instance, United Nations has a cryptocurrency fund, which was created by the UN agency UNICEF, October 2019. The fund collects donations in cryptocurrencies and gives them in the same cryptocurrency. There is no exchange in fiat currency. The crypto fund works within another UNICEF venture, the Innovation Fund, which provides seed funding to blockchain-based companies working in developing countries on social products or services. The World Food Programme, WFP, also founded the WFP Building Blocks project, which has aid sent through the Ethereum blockchain to Syria. So as you see, already there is a sort of interest or acceptance from some institutions. On the other side, you can see that some private players and institutional players are a little bit skeptical. For instance, if you see Goldman Sachs has said that Bitcoin is not an asset class for government, no cash flow or dividends or coupon payments, no diversification, is used by criminals. There's a negative stand adopted by government. Also, on the other side, in the same private world, you have seen Tesla, but also Paul Tudor Jones, who adopted the founder of Tudor Investment Corporation, that he says that the crypto assets as they are a hedge against upcoming inflation as a result of central bank money printing after COVID-19. So there are different points of view, and central banks are a bit skeptical. In fact, there is some sort of cracking down in the US, in India, in China, towards the crypto world. My personal impression is that the crypto world can be a very useful tool if we follow the FATF travel rule. As you know, the Financial Action Task Force on Money Laundering is an intergovernmental organization founded in 1989 to combat money laundering and terrorism financing. There is the travel rule according to which you have to, I don't want to go into details to steal time to the other panelists, but in fact, it tracks down where the money comes and where the money goes. This concept is very important because in the issue about money laundering and terrorist financing or fraud can be easily fought. That is why, in my opinion, the crypto world and the cryptocurrencies are here to stay if some regulations are adopted and followed by the main players. Yeah, I can't hear you.
Manish, you're on mute.
I'm so sorry, technology. So the other aspect of that is that we have the legal aspects of how governments can kind of play out with cryptos, and that is where I would like Anirudh to come in. So we had a worldview and the psychological governmental view of how they see things, but Anirudh, I would like to know from you, crypto asset versus currency versus CBDC, how does the law see it? What can be allowed, what can be not, what can definitely be allowed and definitely not be allowed.
Sure, Manish. Thanks for that. So before I get into how the law sees, kind of tries to make a distinction between these three, and I don't think the law, particularly in India, but generally we do not have evolved frameworks, in law for looking at some of these things. But let me just start from a conceptual point, kind of standpoint first. And I would probably even slightly disagree with the way you kind of classified or explained crypto assets and cryptocurrencies. The way I see it is, crypto assets is the larger universe, right? And cryptocurrency really is, to my mind, a misnomer. I'm not the first person to say this. I think a lot of people hold this view very strongly. But the use of so-called cryptocurrencies as a currency was really, kind of one use case, which is kind of the most well-known use case because of obviously the popularity of Bitcoin, and that's the idea which has caught everybody's attention, right? But really there are thousands of other applications that are being built, and when we talk of something as a cryptocurrency, we sort of confuse that larger point somewhat. So ideally, I would like legal frameworks to kind of look at this thing as crypto assets, not as cryptocurrencies. I think that misnomer causes a lot of confusion. But what is a CBDC? And I think I fully agree with the way you explained it as well. CBDC is nothing but a crypto asset which is issued by a sovereign or by a third party. It could be a bank, but backed by a sovereign, right? Or it has the backing of a sovereign, and it serves the purpose of a currency. Typically, that's the intended use case. Right. So I think the concept of a CBDC is again another subclass of a subset of the larger kind of crypto asset universe, so to say, and it has a very limited kind of use case, right? So that's the way I would like to describe these three.
So the counter question is, tell me, legally speaking, let's say everything is a crypto asset, and say CBDC, the regulators can make the laws for themselves. So really they are the sovereign and they are the law. So, but crypto assets, can the governments really curb them? Let's say if for the benefit of the audience in a democracy like ours, where we have certain rights, so can the governments really go ahead and curb them, or is it ultra vires?
Yeah, so interestingly, if India were to choose to go down this path, we would be sharing the stage with countries like Algeria, Bolivia, China to a certain extent, Venezuela, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, right? So countries we typically, I would say, do not really share constitutional values with. From a constitutional law standpoint, yes, I mean, this was something which was in challenge before the Supreme Court when this battle was being fought out, and will remain to be. I think it is definitely an infringement of my right to trade, may I say even my right to expression, my right to hold property. So it is definitely that, and any law that seeks to curb that right has to be proportionate to the risks that this or the concerns that it is seeking to address, right? So and the point there is that if the government is concerned about, just to take one example, is concerned about money laundering, then there are ways to address money laundering which may be less intrusive than a complete ban, right? Like, for example, you enforce anti-money laundering, policies, etc., which is done with almost every financial asset class today. So I think there are less intrusive ways to regulate, and there is enough precedent around the world. If you look at countries like Switzerland, Singapore, these are the more progressive jurisdictions. A lot of European countries, the US, certain states have taken have set precedent. So there are ways to regulate, which I believe is a better solution than banning, which likely is going to be counterproductive. You cannot really, I mean, I really just need a computer and the internet to hold.
No. So you're not answering the question. So you are the one who actually challenged the RBI order and got it in favor of the ones who are smiling in the panel. So I wanted to know from you the more incisive point, being that, is it a very strong case probably that legally this may not be attainable solution because of the various things that you talked about? Yes or no? One line answer.
Well,
see, there are a lot of people watching this and a lot of people confused. So they need to hear from you that,
yes,
you guys are covered.
Yes, there's a very strong constitutional law argument here. However, the practicality of it cannot be ignored, right? Once your parliament has made a law, the courts are I mean, one of the key challenges in the prior the writ petition that we had just now was that, well, the RBI circular was not backed by a law determining legality of cryptocurrencies to begin with. So if the parliament has not decided, and there was deliberation going on by committees, etc., when the parliament itself or the committee has not decided on the legality, how is it that the RBI is jumping the gun and making a law imposing a ban? Now, if that situation were to change, where the parliament were to deliberate and introduce, and I hope they deliberate because that's seemingly not on the cards, which is the larger problem, I think. But if they were to deliberate and pass a law making the use of cryptocurrencies illegal, I think definitely it becomes a harder, it's a more uphill battle now to kind of for the court, before the court.
All right. So as we move forward, I would assume that as crypto assets, we will be able to save the investment opportunity for all of us. And with that assumption, the whole panel discussion moves, So now, Ajit, please don't go away. I know you are angry, but how do you, so explain me something. How do we understand, should we buy, Ethereum, Bitcoin, Binance, or what? So when you go to the investment worlds which so-called are more structured, and I say that because there is a lot of speculative element running behind fundamental analysis. I would say that's my viewpoint, with all due regrets. How do we understand and decipher an investment choice between cryptos? Let's say these are assets and these are now serious assets and it should be part of a serious asset allocation portfolio. How do we look forward?
So, you said, let's say these are serious assets. Let's not just say that, let's also believe that, right? Because until we do that, this question becomes a little hypothetical. Now, Manish, should we buy gold or should we buy silver? If my mere objective is capital appreciation, how about that? Gold or silver? Basically, the kind of question you're asking, very valid, as in I would want to know whether I should buy gold or silver, comes down to that. Here are one or two very interesting ways in which I can directly answer that question. The first part is that if we are talking of a distributed public blockchain and a token that powers it, such as Bitcoin, and then there are so many others, and we have to decide who is the winner can be decided on two parameters. One would be, since there's a market price associated with these tokens, which one would gain the most, and second would be in which one will gain the maximum adoption in terms of distributed ownership, etc. While these two might seem different, one might seem an economic phenomena and one might seem a phenomenon of markets, but just like economics and markets are related to each other, the fact is that until there is significant adoption of any crypto asset for the purpose it was intended or for some other purpose that evolves, the fact is that its price increase or inflation will only be limited to a certain period of time. So for instance, if you were to look at the top 10 crypto assets in terms of market capitalization, while Bitcoin has always been number one with somewhere between 50 to 75% of market cap, today it is about 65, and ETH has always been number two. But right from number 3 to number 10, the list keeps changing. Especially if you look at 6 to 10, the list almost revamps every few weeks and months. And this has to be seen in the context of the fact that if I include every minor token there is, but only see the active tokens, not tokens that existed once upon a time and have ceased to exist, the number is in the excess of 8,000 today. And we are not even able to maintain stability in adoption for the top 5 and certainly not for the top 10. What this does is that for the person who is not trying to just buy today, sell tomorrow, or buy today and sell today plus 1 minute, that means not the wild trader. If anybody is thinking of this as an investment, a key criteria has to be adoption. And I think that is where first and foremost, Bitcoin definitely meets the requirement of all of these commercially traded investment grade crypto assets. Other than this, if you want to explore, I think that the logic of choosing Bitcoin, which is the granddaddy of it all, versus some of the lesser known coins, maybe something which has a market cap ranked number 1,000 or something much less, I think that the logic becomes similar to when you invest in the stock market and you have to decide in the Indian context whether you want to invest in TCS, HDFC Bank, Reliance, which will be in the top few market caps, and you want to invest in penny stock. And the characteristics are similar, namely, it is easily conceivable that the penny stock might give a dramatic growth, such as 100% in a few days, or 1,000% in a month, and those kind of returns because of very low trading volume, etc. At the same time, the penny stock often ends up in a negative territory or even getting burnt out and getting delisted. The same is true with crypto, that while you might take a fundamental view, and I'm not getting to the technical because technical could be a bunch of people trying to inflate a very thinly traded currency, which is a meaningless distraction to our conversation. Hence, when we look at a fundamental view, every token that came into the market had a stated objective as to what is the purpose of this token. Interestingly, barring, I would say, a few, a lot of objectives of these tokens have changed over time, right? I think what they came for and what they eventually became changed over time. So if you believe that a certain token which might have a lower market capitalization is on a threshold of two factors: number one, rapid adoption compared to where it is today, and number two, a furthering of its use case, then that could be a good token to buy. If, however, you have no such belief, but you want to take an exposure to crypto assets, then probably going with the granddaddy such as Bitcoin might give you a better and more stable outlook.
So adoption and utility, in a nutshell, is what makes you. And other than that, liquidity is what you are looking at, market liquidity. So that's a very good insight, because lot many people didn't have that. So a good perspective. Siddharth, now some exchange business, please. So why do people come to your exchange? And people are driving, going, coming and buying. In fact, I was talking to a wealth manager, and I have a hard sell talking about fractional ownership and all that. And then he told me that, sometimes things investors don't, go by rational. Sometimes it becomes a religion, and everybody has to have a crypto. On that note, I have to ask you some questions. Why do people come to your exchange? What do you think people are coming for? What are they seeking? And the difficult one, do they really understand what they are buying?
All right. So I would probably break this into a few more parts. So there are obviously people who just know about Bitcoin and just want to jump onto the game. But what people don't know about is there are people, or there are funds, there are companies, corporates. In fact, right after the COVID-19 drop that we saw a lot of corporates also onboarding, trying to manage their treasury with bit of Bitcoin or bit of cryptocurrency. I don't know exactly what all they buy, but I've seen those trends coming in. And that is them who have done their research, who know what is this. Probably they have already invested in gold or other commodities for all we know. So I see this trend happening, right? And there are the other people who have probably come to know from the TV, or maybe friends of friends, where everybody's talking about, hey, Bitcoin is amazing, it's going up. If you put 100 rupees right now, it becomes $500 in like a month or two. And that's another attraction. That's another trigger for people to sign up, right? And what happens is, in these processes, people start researching about Bitcoin. Not everybody is blind about just putting their money in. They start researching about Bitcoin, and you'll see during these times, you'll see maximum search for what is Bitcoin overall, even on Google, right? So people start watching these videos, they start reading these articles. Even if you see that everybody's trying to understand, and there's a lot of curiosity around what to understand this, and that's amazing, because a lot of people get convinced, a lot of people don't get convinced. The folks who get convinced, when Elon Musk tweeting about it, obviously a lot more janta got convinced about this. But and they're probably making this move to having an asset as a class. So
tell me the truth. So tell me really why people are coming there.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, bottom line is the price movement that is happening right now. Like I said, from a corporate point of view, it is probably hedging against the inflation that is being subjected, and they're probably even hedging it against other assets. From a retail perspective, it probably is not hedging, but it is more about increasing their portfolio, right? And today, if you see what's the most highest performing asset, that your crypto assets are something that is the highest performing.
So is it because there's a party in town and I need to be there?
Nobody wants to.
And even Elon Musk is going.
Yeah. I mean, the FOMO kicks in, right? So the party is happening, and I'm not part of that, right? So that happens for sure.
I truly echo all the sentiments, from the very serious ones like Massimo, trying to talk from the institutional side, to to what was explained by Anirudh and and Ajit on how to choose a portfolio and things like that. What I want to say to the organizers is, this needs more education, probably.
Right.
Not in the same thing. This needs more education. There is a mass movement towards this, and we need to spread the right word, probably in the parliament, if we can. So So thank you very much. Now coming to the traditional world colliding with this, so Sridhar, from the traditional banker perspective, from banking point of view, do you think CBDCs, like Massimo earlier explained, there are two ways to do CBDC. One is, the RBI does the wholesale part and the banks do issuances of the, CBDCs at their own end. Like, in Hong Kong and some jurisdictions, the banks issue the currency notes, etc. So something like that, do you think CBDC should be issued by banks and the regulator being the wholesale blockchain, or do you think it should be direct CBDC? And when I'm talking to you, I'm aware that you look at it from risk management perspective. So so coming back to CBDC and coming back to your banker's jacket, how do you see it?
Yeah, thanks. I think the question is really a little early maybe at this point of time, because we're still debating what are the contours of the CBDC right now, right? Because we are at the start of evolution, I would say, at least in terms of CBDC, it might make sense that a central authority issues it, and then banks play their part. And over a period of time, you graduate to a situation where banks can issue
the reverse you were suggesting.
Yeah, I would suggest that is how it starts. That is a bit of gradualism, maybe not very popular these days, but then I would say that is a way of starting something in a controlled environment. And of course, there's going to be a regulator. In this country, we are fond of regulators, so we will have a regulator for these things. And but the way we are evolving here, I think there are lots of gaps in understanding. You asked this wonderful question about why do people invest, right? But then today, if banks were asked to handle these things, do they know how to handle this? They don't really, right? Because we have used the blockchain technology to do a number of POCs and maybe a few things in production actually, such as supply chain and cross-border payments. Today, there's been this announcement, right? A bunch of banks working along with payment companies. And so we are actually getting into what is the actual use of blockchain technology, really to move to a stage where we say a CBDC is a crying need today. I think in this country, because we first go from the fellow who's crying first, we address that, right? So I think that is something that we are not there maybe. There's a lot of research to be done, which is the better option.
Okay.
Whether it is the banks issuing it, we have a bunch of banks. Who do you allow them to issue? Who do you allow to issue rather, right? The top ones or everyone. And what do banks need to have if they need to issue? So I would rather think the balance at this stage of evolution is for a central issuer. Of course, the entire ecosystem uses it.
All right, thank you. So Ajit, coming back to you, so I will keep coming back to you for fundamental understandings. So do you think between, the cryptocurrency or central bank cryptocurrency, as Anirudh said, I need to correct that only guy who can issue the cryptocurrency is central bank, and therefore rest everyone is legally protected. No, you didn't say that, but I'm quoting myself. So, what will be the cryptocurrency that we can actually use? How do you see that? Will it be, and use, when I said not crypto asset use, asset is one use. What is the cryptocurrency that we will use? Either it will be, central bank, or you see a hybrid model. See, I know a thing or two, so I'm asking you the right question.
Actually, very good question. See, what has happened is, if I will just quickly in 30 seconds run through the imperatives of money management. 1,000 years ago, barter system. I don't know whether it was literally 1,000 years ago, long time ago, barter system, inefficiency leading to various forms of money up to fiat currency, which came recently, removed the gold standard. That is where we are. If you think about it, in many senses of the term, the barter system was the most real way of transaction, except highly inefficient, right? The advantage of money is that it does not necessarily give you the perception of exchanging value, but its efficiency as a medium of exchange, as a store of value, as a unit of account. However, when the entire digital or electronic or connectivity world changes, we can once again explore that wasn't there a better way to do it? For example, can't we have one asset which is a store of value and another asset which is a medium of exchange? These are two fundamental pillars of money, right? The third one being unit of account. So it is conceivable that that might be the case, which earlier was inefficient because we didn't live in a digitized world, right? I personally feel that central bankers will move to some form of CBDC, and the motivation, whether this motivation will be fulfilled or not, remains to be seen, but the motivation would be some amount of disintermediation. As Massimo talked about the fact that the purpose of banks is no longer as a place to invest money because we are at a negative interest rate. So really it is facilitation of transactions that banks do. And if that can be done on a public blockchain a central bank blockchain, you don't need banks at all for that purpose. So I think that serves a very good medium of exchange. Crypto assets, as we call it, will Bitcoin be used to buy coffee? Will Ethereum be used to buy coffee? Well, to some extent it has happened, but it is very, very minimal. I completely agree that in a hyper-inflating asset price of Bitcoin, it does not make sense for me to spend it on coffee because I just held it. Then 2 months later, I could buy 2 coffees with it. And 2 years later, I could buy 10 coffees with it. So I should not buy coffee with it. So at this point of time,
we have a situation coming up where we say that I have 5 Ethereum, 5 XYZ and 5 Bitcoins. And therefore today, my best payment method is the XYZ because the Bitcoin is more dearer to me. And people might be paying, and this is something that I just imagined, people might be having a bouquet of assets, like everybody has their own, and they may use these assets in the classical barter way to pay from the cheapest of the ones that the other guy is willing to accept.
Yeah. I mean, that's usually how the currency is inflationary.
Hey, let me just tell you one very interesting thing. So it is not cheapest; it is the most inflationary one. For example,
correct.
I'm sorry to take your point, but one quick thing: when we say that all assets, whether it's stocks, real estate, gold, inflate over time, I want to view it differently and say actually that's not the case. It is a fiat currency that deflates over time. So whatever is the most deflating asset, which today is fiat currency of the things we are discussing, should be the one that you expend. And whatever is the most inflationary one, which increases in value, should be the one that you keep. Sorry, Siddharth, please go ahead.
I mean, it's just other side of the coin, how you see it. Like in general, currency is inflationary in nature. That is why you don't want to keep it. You want to spend it out, right? And exactly what you said. And inflationary. If you're holding on to gold, you would never want to let go of that because it's always going to go up, and that is bad for the economy because economy needs more transaction and the a move of value from one place to other, and that's where currency plays in. So currency playing as an transaction. For the purpose of transaction, even I don't see that happening because ultimately it will become deflationary and people will stop using that for transactions.
Yeah, so my mind is going bonkers in terms of what it can do to lending, and what it can do to asset-based lending and how we will understand assets and things like that. This is all subject to if Anirudh tells me that don't worry, things are there to stay. Anirudh, again, one more comment on that, because we have heard about all of this. Do you think that we will be living, at least, India is not on any either extremes. We are not North Korea, and we are not probably, to that extent, we have Supnendu coming in, as progressive as Supnendu, and Singapore, we would say. So do you think we will go to the North Korean side?
Well, there's definitely a fair bit of fear mongering. It's difficult to say, but really, if the see, one is that none of us have really seen the draft bill, right, which is it's not been made public yet. And if one has to, I mean, if it takes the shape of the draft bill that was issued in 2019 by the Interministerial Committee, then yes, it does look quite it's a depressing situation. But hopefully, I mean, that will not be the case.
All right. So, one again, Sridhar, 1 minute, I would like to understand from you. So, about what are the risks that you see if a digital currency is issued in whatever form by banks or RBI? If people like us have digital currency, what do you see the risk to the system? And nobody has done it at scale. So I'm just trying to ask an imaginary question. We don't even know the real risks. So what are the risks that you see that we need to, foresee, mitigate, and manage? So why I give you the background is I was talking to one of the secretaries probably a couple of years back, and one of the risks that, and this was when India had the first panel on cryptocurrency created, and he confided in a private meeting that one of the risks that they foresee is inflation, because now nobody is controlling the flow of money. Suddenly the money is there in people's hand and nobody really knows how things are going to span out. Now with that background, I mean, this is what he shared. Probably you from the banking side may be seeing a one or two more risks because we have a cash equivalent now.
So that's an excellent question. Actually, if I go back to my previous role, where we were dealing with bonds and then interest rates and all that, central banks control money supply. The objectives are growth and inflation control, right? That is the equation there. Now, if a part of cash is in the form of CBDC, and now that is lying outside the central bank's purview, it's lying outside of that, then you have two components to cash now. One, which is the sovereign currency, which is in the form of rupee notes or money in bank accounts, right? In savings account. And then other, which is in the form of CBDC. You need to aggregate both in order to understand what is the impact of a growth of the aggregate on growth or inflation. Point number one. Point number two, we still do not know how CBDC would behave in terms of its use in exchange, because the extent of multiplying that happens with what the Reserve Bank or the government issues is what determines the extent of liquidity that flows into the system, right? So we do not know. We will know in some time. So you need to ponder about these things when you make those decisions on interest rates in the Monetary Policy Committee. There is other impact, which is about banks lend more than what they have by using this fractional system, right? I keep a certain amount of money with the central bank. The central bank says, okay, you are safe now. You can go ahead and lend the rest of the money. Some guys come and again put deposit. Again, I keep a percentage. I go and give out this money. So whenever a depositor comes and asks for money, the Reserve Bank, the central bank, believes that this amount of reserves maintained is taking care of the risk. Now, if we are in a situation where we are going to have this CBDC, what about the reserve requirements for the CBDC, right? And who will do it? If banks are not holders of the CBDC, someone else is. So how does that work? There is another thing which is actually very basic stuff, which is about accounting of transactions in a bank. Regardless of what currency that a bank deals in, ultimately everything is reflected in its mother currency, which is the base currency, which is rupees. So eventually for the CBDCs that are around, which a bank will handle, it needs to convert that into rupees as well. Now, presumably because this is issued by the central bank of the country, let us presume it is 1 CBDC equals 1 rupee. You do that, but you need to complete your processing and measure the risk at all times. What is it that is flowing through your system? So you need your accounting systems, which is actually your core banking and other systems, the ability to track all that. The final thing is about the money laundering piece. There is an issue of CBDC by a central authority, fine, but the transactions using the CBDC are not flowing through the banking system. They're flowing through some other settlement system. I'm just using a word there. Who tracks the usage of the CBDC there? It's not about the issue. right? As it moves forward, are we able to track who's using it?
Yeah, so the answer
when,
that techies will give is AI.
Yeah, I know there are enough things to give, and I'm not a techie. I won't be able to challenge them. But the point I'm making is, how do we track this? That mechanism needs to be built. You asked about risk. I'm possibly talking about enablement and linking them to the risks where it originates.
Thank you, Sridhar. Now I would like to end the panel with a last note from Massimo about what are some of the key recommendations. Now you've spent some time with Nation of Nations, etc. So what are some of the key recommendations you would like to give to any government considering considering cryptos in general, whether to allow, not allow? That is one step, and number two is issuing and or recognizing CBDCs. What are some of the 2-3 things that you can share as learnings?
Yeah, first of all, I want to point out one issue which is being slightly mentioned, and that is that the switch from the interest of institutional investors. The interest in Bitcoins has led to an increase in interest in the larger cryptocurrency ecosystem, which is not led by retail investors only, but and speculation as it was in the past, but by financial institutions such as banks and hedge funds, as they need to have an exposure to cryptocurrency in case these ones become the standard and generally accepted tokens in 2021. So this is an important issue because crypto has gone more institutional to some extent. This interest gives us an idea why there is such a big appreciation of Bitcoin, what's happened over the last few months. Having said that, I think governments are not against cryptocurrencies, but they are concerned with the illegal use of them. That's why, as I said before, there are some tools that can be used, like the travel rule, which effectively tracks down who's buying the cryptos, Bitcoin, Ethereum, or whatever, and so that you can see where the money flows, comes and goes. And this is quite important for money laundering purposes as well, and for keeping track of that. Now, coming back to CBDCs, I think they have a great positive impact for consumers, and also it's a wake-up call for the banking system. Why? Because banks have traditionally been intermediaries which took advantage of their position, taking out deposits, giving out loans, but effectively, especially in a low interest rate environment, you can see that this what's causing is that they take advantage of low interest rates and make up profits out of taking no risks to some extent. That is why CBDCs gives an incentive to banks to be more active and to fight for their deposits. This is good for efficiency of the financial system. I know that, of course, banks might be a little bit afraid of that, but this is the way forward. No, there is no way of stopping it. Now,
I think in the interest of time, I think I would like to thank everyone. And I'm happy we could do a very live, energetic panel. Please smile, all the guests, and wave to all the audience, which we can't see, and thank you very much. I hope to the organizers, that we have caught up with time and we are leaving on time honorably. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Manish, for that wonderful moderation. And
Thanks,
thank you
guys.
to all the other panelists for joining us and sharing their thoughts on this platform. I think I can vouch for everybody that we have been able to impart a lot of clarity on a lot of major issues regarding Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies with respect to law and CBDCs. And hopefully we have also got a lot of points to ponder and the government has got a lot of points to ponder over. Thank you so much for joining in.
It's an afternoon time post lunch, so